So my talk this morning is on adventures in hymnody. What's hymnody? It's a study of hymns, church music, hymns, prayers, lamentations, songs of prayers and lamentations, usually of a religious bent. How many people grew up in a church, the Catholic Church? How many people grew up in a Jewish synagogue? Anybody Baptist, Methodist, Church of Christ, Lutheran? Okay, how many people Presbyterian, Unitarian? Okay, the reason why I'm asking you this? Because it has an effect on how you feel music should be in the service. Human beings have decided this book is a huge secret code. It is. There's all kinds of history and theology involved in here. In fact, the reason why Meg is a Unitarian is she was reading the back of the hymnal. I'm serious. When she was going to seminary at Princeton, they didn't ever mention Unitarians, not once. Universalists either. And when she read the hymnal, she said, "Oh, my people, I'm here." So I'm going to talk a little bit about church music history. Christianity comes out of the Jewish tradition. In the Jewish tradition, you have a rabbi and a cantor. The cantor is singing to God. And God only hears the singing. It's an interesting concept, right? That's where the Catholic Church gets it from. Early Christianity and in the Jewish faith, all the other religions around them used a lot of instruments, a lot of drums, a lot of things. And these things became associated with paganism. They got associated with the profane as opposed to the sacred. And so early music was a lot of chant, plain chant, if you've heard Gregorian chant, no instruments, singing. And usually somebody singing a line and the choir answering, the minister singing a line and the choir answering, call and response. That lasts until the Reformation, and where we get the two people who probably have the most to do with a difference in the way you were raised musically, and that's Martin Luther and John Calvin. My least favorite person on the planet. Martin Luther lived 1483 to 1546. He was a monk, and he had disagreements mostly about indulgences and such, the things that he thought were corrupting the church. And so he tacked his 15 tenets to the church door. But he actually didn't try to leave the church. He was excommunicated. One of the things that he did that was a big change, like if you were in the Jewish or the Christian, the Catholic tradition, the music was not for you. The music was for God. You were lucky to be there. And if you behaved all right, you got communion, right? You got to participate in a reenactment of the Last Supper. The big change where Martin Luther comes in is because he thought music was a gift from God and that you should celebrate it. So he was okay with professional musicians. He was okay with instruments. He was okay with four-part singing. He was okay with loving the music. Even as far back as St. Augustine said, "The weaker mind may be stimulated to devout thoughts by the delights of the ear. Yet when I happen to be moved more by the singing than by what is sung, I confess to have sinned grievously." So it's very old, this idea that sacred music, you're supposed to, participate, but it's all for God. Martin Luther thought that the congregation was the center, that you were the cantor, that we were the cantor, and that we would participate in singing for the glory of God, and that the beauty of that was meant to be. And so that school of thought, you get the Lutheran tradition, Anglican tradition, Methodist, Baptist. Music is, often the music director is a trained musician. And you might have a beautiful big choir. Now, unfortunately, Unitarians come from the other school. John Calvin lived about the same time, a little bit later, 1509 to 1564. The best story on John Calvin I can tell you is John Calvin thought we should only sing the Psalms. By that, I mean the 150 Psalms that are in the Old Testament that supposedly King David wrote. Though that was the only music until way up until the 1700s, all right, in this teradtion. You were only allowed to sing the Psalms. You were not supposed to enjoy it too much. So often people were rural-based, and they had walked there. They'd come on a boat from Europe, and we're talking about the Anglos now. They'd come over, and they carry with them a psaltery. A psaltery is a book that has the Psalms in it. No music. How do you know what to sing? You might want your hymnal for this part. Why don't you turn to page 146, 147. 147, 148, sorry. Now, if you look down at the bottom of the page on the right-hand side of each page, it says in capital letters on 147, it says Christmas hymn, and then L.M. What's that? That's one of the secret codes. I told you there were secret codes. This is long meter. Like the doxology, if you grew up in a church where you said, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. That is 8888, long meter. Now, what's the numbers mean? That's the hymn meter. Every syllable counts. So you can count them on your fingers, the lines. How many lines is it? What are the beats of it? That's the hymn meter. Now, back in the day, people didn't have a Kathleen or Brian or someone to play who could play a million different tunes, and they didn't have the music in the book. So you knew a song for each kind of hymn meter, and so you could sing the words to the same tunes or different tunes, but you were limited in your knowledge. That's where that comes from, and we've carried it over to the present day. On the next page, on 148, it says CM. That stands for common meter, which is 8.6.8.6. And two very famous songs that we know, Joy to the World and Amazing Grace, are common meter hymns. And I can sing them to each other. I will show you. Joy to the world, the Lord has come. Let earth receive her King. Or, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Okay, so way up until almost the 1800s, that was the case. The later psalteries have music around the 1700s that starts. But the people who came over that are our ancestors, the Pilgrims that started the Congregationalist churches in New England, they are our relatives in a way, and they did not believe in having too much fun. The best story on John Calvin is he was sitting at dinner. His friends across the table from him eating soup, and his friend says, "Oh, the soup is so good." John Calvin gets up and takes a cold glass of water and pours it in the soup because that happiness that you're enjoying your soup is distracting you from heaven. So when you all are sitting in the service and you think, oh, they shouldn't be clapping here, or they should be clapping here, or how come nobody's singing, or how about nobody's saying yet, amen, or not? How come nobody's participating? Or any of these traditions that happen, they are all based on somebody deciding this stuff and which camp you come from. Your economic class will also affect that. But for the most part, if you're from a John Calvinist church, as in Presbyterian or Unitarian, you were raised to be solemn in the service and not clap. And the reason why I think this is important is because if you want diversity in the service, you need to understand why you feel the way you do so that you can kind of open yourself up to the possibility that you might not have to enjoy everything that happens. If you want diversity, you're going to have to not like things about at least a quarter of the time. Whether you're raised in the North or the South might have a big effect on that. There's a lot of different people involved, and I'm going to talk about a few of these people today, but this is a really interesting subject, and there's lots of information out there on this stuff. Why are Americans the way we are? Why do we like the music that we like? Even way before I came here with Meg, I'd come here as a musician and played for Brent. And to me, Brent is the ideal model for a Unitarian Universalist music director, in that the music is never the same week to week. We have classical music, we have jazz, we have rock and roll, we have Black Sabbath, we have everything, right? We have beautiful music like we have today, coming more out of the classical common practice. But you want to change it up. If you want people to be comfortable and you want people to come, you want to change it up. Now, the hymnal is redone every 20 years or so. One of the people who did the hymnal during the period of the Civil War, that era, was Samuel Longfellow and Samuel Johnson. They were two UU ministers from Boston. They went to Harvard. Samuel Longfellow's name might be familiar to you because he's the younger brother of Henry Longfellow, the poet. They wrote the hymnal. A lot of these older hymns in here are in their hymnal. The person who was the head of the committee for this hymnal is a friend of ours, a colleague of Meg's, the minister at Columbus, Ohio for many years. She's retired now, Mark Bellatini. He was a minister. He was not trained in music, but he was a big opera aficionado. A lot of people on his committee and the committees who have all through time decided who's in the hymnal are usually ministers. So, how many people feel like they have a hard time singing some of this stuff? I would hope that we would encourage the next committee to have some people who went to school, music school. So why is this music written the way it is now? Why do we learn in school to read music and all that? Do you know that in early America, that's not the way that we did it? They had singing schools. One of the early American composers is named William Billings. Let's see when he lived exactly. William Billings lived 1746 to 1800. He had a singing school. People used to go to singing school to learn to sing a cappella, because that's how most churches had it. You couldn't really carry an organ or a piano on the trail on your wagon, right? So people mostly sang congregational singing, and they did a thing which we now call shape note singing. There would be, the four parts would be in each corner with the person who's directing the clerk in the middle, and they kept time like this. And people sang full voice, full out. A very American tradition. William Billings wrote the hit song. He was the Lady Gaga of the Revolutionary War. His hit song was called Chester. There's one of his hymns in here, the Psalm By the Rivers of Babylon. You know that song? The tune that you sing, that's a William Billings. So often on the bottom of the page, it will say in the left-hand corner who wrote the words and who arranged the music and the copyright. You can tell a lot by what's in the hymnal. You can tell that it's baby boomers that arranged this hymnal in a way, because there's a lot of Pete Seeger songs. And there's a lot of songs that have been carried over from the hymnals. There's a reason why Universalists complain that it's not 50-50 anymore between Unitarian and Universalist, because there's only like 2 Universalist hymns in the whole thing. You can tell it's a Universalist hymn if it says blue. The Ballou family were famous ministers, but they were also music people. And singing was really important. The singing schools were often started by ministers to get their congregations to sing better. And if you want to go to shape note singing now, Texas has 4 schools, I think that's right. And I was just told that there's going to be a conference in the fall. If you want to hear that kind of singing, there's 2 different schools of shape note, 4 note and 7, and it's based on the do, re, mi, fa, so. Do you know what I mean? Okay, you all sang that song on Sound of Music? Okay, well that actually comes from a really ancient hymn, and there was in the 11th century there was a monk named Guido of Arezzo, and he directed a choir, and he didn't have money to buy music then. Paper was very expensive, so he would point on his hand in a different place for do, different place for fa, so, and that would be kind of cool to learn how to do that. And he used the Latin from a hymn about St. John, and that tune, everybody evidently knew it, was a hit song, and that's how you would know where do was, fa, so. But the whole shape note thing is based on that, and if you look on the front of the bulletin, that's a shape note hymn. And see, the notes are shaped differently, so you could learn, you'd go to singing school, you'd learn how to do that, to sing that note by that shape. They did a study in the 50s to compare whether this notation that we're more familiar with, or shape note, was better for learning music, and actually the shape note won. But my other villain in this story, Lowell Mason, was a contemporary of William Billings, a little younger actually, and he lived in Boston, and he was the music director at First Parish in UU Church in Massachusetts for a short time, and then later he was the music director at a Presbyterian church, and he was trained in the common practices, which is what we call Mozart, Haydn, up to Beethoven, really. If you go to music school now to be a composer, I had to study the same book by this guy named Fux, F-U-X, to do counterpoint that Mozart learned from, Haydn learned from, Beethoven learned from. And so he felt that the German tradition was the more superior. His friends were called better music people, and they went on a campaign, serious campaign, to suppress the American tradition of shape note singing. Now, every hymn in here that says Virginia Harmony, that's a shape note book. The person who put the tune that we sing Amazing Grace to now, his name was Billy Walker, and he was the music director at the First Baptist Church in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where I used to live, which is why I think they taught me this in school there. He put the tune that we now sing to Amazing Grace to that tune. If you look in the back of the hymnal, there's about 665. They have a list of composers and sources of music. Then they have index of composers at 55. And then after that, you have the alphabetical index of tunes. Now, what is that? You see on the right-hand side of every hymn, it says Christmas hymn or McKee. That is the name of the tune that you are singing the hymn to. And that goes back to that time where people only knew a few songs. And if you keep going, after the alphabetical index of tunes, there's the metric index of tunes. So say you knew how to play one song, but you didn't know the other. And then the common meter, you knew how to play Joy to the World, but you didn't know how to play Amazing Grace. Here's a list of all the tunes that would work in the common meter. And the D means double, that's all that means. I think that's pretty cool. And then you have a topical index of hymns, in case you actually wanted to match the music to the sermon. Shock. Okay, so Lowell Mason basically, I guess it's good, he got musical education involved in the public school systems. He's the reason that you do that. He's the reason why a lot of these hymns have backing music from Beethoven, Haydn, people of the German persuasion. But we lost a lot of the shape note. Now, the shape note tradition's still going strong in the Primitive Baptist, the Free Methodist, and they have 4 schools here in Texas and many in Tennessee. So if it's something you're interested in, if you saw the movie Cold Mountain, you heard some shape note singing. But I hope you got a little out of this and that you found it more interesting than you thought you would. Thank you.